VHS Massacre Radio. Got my giant iced coffee here. Just figured I'd do a quick podcast. It's Christmas Day. The baby is napping, and Stephanie's taking a nap too. So it actually gives me a second to catch up with everyone and tell everyone what I'm up to. So the biggest thing is there is a January 8th sneak preview of VHS Massacre Too, my new documentary at Anthology Film Archives in New York. So Anthology Film Archives is a great venue. It's on 2nd and 2nd, right downtown, and they've really been a mainstay for independent and exploitation films. The new doc essentially focuses around exploitation films. And for those who don't know, when you say exploitation, what you really are talking about is it's market exploitation, right? So people don't like the word exploitation in regard to film, but it really is about genre film. Like you're focusing on something very specific, like monster movies or martial arts movies. Black exploitation was very important, as well as even just bank heist movies. Anything that you can zero in on. Biker movies. It can sort of be anything. And in some regard, comic book films are exploiting a specific market. They're comic book fans, Of course, it's incredibly mainstream. But the thing is, when you're talking about exploitation, it is always connected with low budget. And so there's sort of sensational films that are connected with low budget. And I think, over time I realized that, people refer to them in different ways. Sometimes you talk about them as B movies. Well, that's what they were in the 50s with the drive-in. These big monster movies like The Blob, things like that. Later in the 60s and 70s, there's almost no daylight between exploitation and independent film. So if you think of Easy Rider, really that came about because Roger Corman made Wild Angels, and then they wanted him to make Easy Rider, and then Dennis Hopper ended up directing. So what you have is a situation where independent and exploitation they're always tied together, because the true word, the true meaning of exploitation is supposed to be outside the studio system. So a lot of people use it incorrectly. So they see a company like A24 and they say, oh, that's independent. Yeah, except they're all A-list directors and stars, and it's bankrolled by, it's the kid of a billionaire. I mean, it basically is being the whole company's bankrolled by someone's dad, who's a billionaire. And so that's a pretty exclusive club. And so I think you really have to push that outside of the independent realm. So and some sometimes it can get murky. So like, let's say for instance, El Mariachi. So Robert Rodriguez, he raised the money on his own, made the money on his own. Then it was purchased by a company, I think it was Dimension, and then they put, they dumped like $100,000 worth of post-production and then re-released it. Same thing happened with Clerks. Made independently, Miramax bought it, dumped money into it, so it wouldn't, they fix up the audio and, retime the film and did all this stuff. So what you have is a situation where independent filmmakers are independent, but when they can be scooped up almost immediately, and there are very few people that stay independent. And so one of those people, like, for instance, Roger Corman, for the most part, stayed independent because he kept producing his own films in his little film studio, and it was outside of the major studios. Lloyd Kaufman is another one. His company has run longer than almost any independent film company in the history of the United States, 45 years and going. And he's stayed independent. They've kept their own little company, and they didn't, because a lot of times a company will get bought out. For instance, in the movie we talk about this company called Think Film. So Think Film was, it was essentially bought by a media conglomerate and was no longer independent. And companies like that, Think Film and even Miramax, companies of that size, they're referred to as mini majors. So they're so big they are the studio system. They're just not the main companies you'd think of, like Universal and all things like that. So the documentary concentrates on this concept that media consolidation has essentially all but destroyed the industry of exploitation films. It's not that they don't get made, it's that because every profitable avenue is controlled by like 5 companies, that they're getting strangled out. And a few examples that I hit are YouTube. They constantly are reducing the amount of revenue partners make, so only the top channels make any money. Amazon Prime deleted thousands of independent films, even films out of people's permanent libraries, which is wild. The documentary gets into that. And so you have a situation where all of the infrastructure is owned by private companies and totally controlled and locked up. And the consolidation is pretty crazy, right? So you have like, I used to work for NBC, Universal, and they had a digital studios. So that's a TV network and a movie studio. Okay, and that never used to be allowed. The concept that a TV studio, a TV studio owning a film company. That's in 1948 there was this decree where they broke up a lot of this media consolidation, and what it did is it formed. That's actually why there was an independent film boom later in the 60s and 70s, was because they broke up all of these companies, and what that allowed is people like me and Lloyd and all these people to make our little movies and actually make some profit on it. So you have a situation where in the past, something like CBS, when they broke up the media consolidation, CBS wasn't even able to own all of the programs on their network. So that meant that independent TV producers could come in and make television. So I think it was Norman Lear who made like Good Times and All in the Family and The Jeffersons. Those were actually independently produced TV shows, and they were some of the most dynamic and progressive at their time in a way, because they brought a reality to TV that hadn't been seen before, and they were pushing really important issues. But that's all but gone. So you could have you think of like Time Warner Cable. Okay, so that's Warner Brothers. So that's a film studio plus a cable company. So they're owning all the infrastructure in order to give you, have internet in your home, and then they're owning a lot of the content on that. And so you get to these places where there's only, maybe 5 companies. So you got like Disney, Viacom, Time Warner Cable, and even if you like for instance, like Shudder. There's a horror network called Shudder, and Joe Bob Briggs is on it, which, by the way, Joe Bob Briggs is in the new documentary. So if you like Shudder, right, Shudder is very cool. It's a horror network that, essentially they only play horror, which is excellent. And it's curated. They do a really good job. But it's not independent, right? So there's this illusion of variety. The point is there's an illusion of variety, right? So Shudder is owned by AMC. AMC is gigantic, and then AMC is owned by another Chinese conglomerate. So you get into a situation where you think you're watching something new and independent, and you're not. It's all the same company doing this stuff. And so it's the illusion of variety that's not really there. And so you do, in result, have these shows, and a lot of them are almost exactly the same. I mean, they're still trying to target to newer audiences, and you rarely see content that's super raw, like um, something crazy like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, like how those films were made in the 70s. They remake those now, but they're just so bland. So there are very few envelopes being pushed, and the underground filmmakers have been almost pushed out of the market. So that's why trauma is so important.